Usually when we hear from judges, it's in the formal, sometimes scholarly decisions they issue from the bench. Not this time. Retired Superior Court Judge Marie Corbett's new memoir is called January, A Woman Judge's Season of Disillusion, and it offers a candid accounting of the struggles and trade-offs she faced as a woman sitting in judgment of others. And Marie Corbett joins us now, and it's a great pleasure to meet you.
It's a very great pleasure to meet you, too.
Thanks for coming into TVO. Let's do a little background on you first. Where are you from?
I was born in Avondale, Newfoundland.
And went to law school where?
I went to McGill initially for my BA, and then I went to law school at the University of Toronto, because at that time, McGill University offered only a civil law degree.
How many women in your law school class?
9.
Out of how many?
150.
How was that?
Well, it was strange. We were considered quite unusual in the law school classes. If a woman spoke up, you could hear a pin drop, everyone wanting to hear what they said. We very much felt like, or at least I did, an outsider.
This is 1970s we're talking now, is that right?
60s.
1960s, even earlier.
Yes.
Okay. How long did you practice law for?
16 years.
16 years.
Yes.
And at what point did you start to think, I think I'd rather be a judge?
I didn't actually think about being a judge. I was approached to be a judge, and I declined it. And a friend of mine said, "Marie, who do you think you are declining that offer? It may never come around again." At the time, I was engaged in drafting pension reform legislation for Canada and the provinces, and I felt that I had to continue with that task and undertaking. And as it turned out, they did ask me again. As you probably know, in order to be a judge, you have to have been a lawyer for 10 years. And as you point out, the demographics at the time meant that there weren't an awful lot of women to draw on at the time. For example, we were the largest class, 9 in University of Toronto Law School. There were 4 women in second year law school and only 2 in third. So there took time for those women to get through 10 years of practice in order to be eligible to be appointed a judge.
And when you finally were appointed, you joined a pool of judges. What was the male-female ratio at that time?
At that time, women were 3% of the federal judiciary.
3%?
3%, yes. We've come a long way.
What do you think it is today?
Today, across Canada, it's about 47%, although in Ontario, it's a little less. I think it's about 31 only.
Only 31% in Ontario?
I think so, or that might just be the Superior Court here, but it's a little lower than the national average.
And how long were you a judge for?
13 years.
What did you like about being a judge?
Oh, I loved being a judge. So much of it suited me. First of all, I liked the intellectual rigor. I liked the detachment of being removed from the fray, if you like, although I was always in the fray before. I liked to encounter, as I did, an enormous number of people coming before me. I enjoyed solving problems. I enjoyed analyzing the law.
You say you enjoyed people, but of course, many of the people who would come before you, how shall we put this, were not necessarily there under the best of circumstances.
No, I did other kinds of judging as well. I did civil work and divisional court work. And you encounter people anyway. You don't just encounter or deal with the accused person. You would deal with people that well, complainants and members of the family and all kinds of people. Yes, it was. I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. It's like going to the movies every day. It was so endlessly exciting.
But obviously there were parts of being a judge that you found problematic because you left the bench early. We'll talk about that in a second, but what were some of the things that you found problematic?
I found that cross-examination was difficult. It's a grueling experience, and that doesn't matter whether it's a civil case or a criminal case. It's extremely difficult to be attacked and have your credibility called into question. And it is especially difficult when the situation involves describing sexual assaults or matters that are personal.
You had some awful cases in front of you, didn't you?
I did,
I mean,
yes. We do, yes.
Would you want to give an example of one of the more sort of difficult things that you had to deal with and listen to all the details of?
Yes, I had a horrible case where a mother and father, husband and wife, were accused of breaking every major bone in their newborn child. And to see the x-rays of the small baby and come to grips with that was extremely difficult. Towards the end of my judicial career, I presided at a murder trial where an accused person had raped and murdered a Filipino nanny in the city of Toronto. And I used to always make it a point to look directly at an accused person. And in this case, I actually couldn't face him or couldn't maintain my gaze at him. And then as the evidence was coming in bags, and I was looking at her clothes and her purse and all the things that were with her at that last day, I was very moved.
How do you maintain your judicial neutrality and not take the emotion of those kinds of cases home with you every night?
I remember saying to a woman judge when I was first appointed, and she said that to me. She said, "Well, Marie, you can't take it home with you." And I said, well, the day that I can't take it home with me is the day I probably shouldn't be a judge. You take it home and you park it somewhere. I know that, for example, doctors have the same problems or issues to deal with or challenges that
if they lose a patient.
If they lose a patient, and also dealing even more directly with people suffering. I mean, it's got to be extremely hard to deal with that as well. And I think we compartmentalize, we intellectualize, very much so.
But we should talk about some of the difficulties of the job that ultimately made you decide to walk away from the bench. I mean, you could have stayed till age 75, I guess, right?
Yes.
But you walked out. How many years did you give up by leaving when you did?
I was 55, so 20.
You gave up 20 years
yes.
of potentially being on the bench.
Correct.
Okay, so what had you had enough of by that time?
Well, I probably had had enough of law, but it wasn't that so much. It was the fact that I re-examined my life after my friend Anne Armstrong Gibson died of cancer. And she was 46 years old, and we were similar in many ways because we were both career-driven. She was hugely successful, had written books on estate law. She had done immense public service, and even when she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, she founded Wellspring. And since her death, there are 10 Wellspring centers across Canada. They offer over 30 programs. And she founded that when she was diagnosed with cancer. And she did it from the perspective that I had nowhere to go when I was diagnosed with cancer. There was nothing for my family, nothing outside of a medical context.
I meaning Anne.
That's right. That's what she said to me. Yes, I have nowhere to go. And when she recognized that there was not that out there in society, that she founded it herself. I mean, so to speak, at death's door, if you like. And she was 46 and I was 52. And I thought, well, if that happened to me, if I had that kind of diagnosis, what would I do? And it caused me to reevaluate exactly what I was doing. And I realized that I did wish to live a fuller life in the sense that I did not want the law to be that dominant in my life. I consider myself to be an excellent judge, to have been an excellent lawyer and a very good judge. And if you asked me to describe my being a mother, daughter, and all the rest of it, I'd probably say I was just adequate. But the career always came first.
I have to tell you, I love the way that you, because I mean, for those who haven't read the book, you do weave sort of in between the stuff that you saw on the bench with this friend of yours, Anne, who's undergoing this awful, cancer and chemotherapy treatment and all of that. I do want to ask you though, was Anne your best friend?
No.
She was not your best friend, and yet you spent hours upon hours upon hours with her in hospital, doing chores for her, trying to organize her family life. What compelled you to do all that?
It's hard to say. I suppose it was the immediacy and the immediate connection. It only took place that intensely over the last 2 weeks of her life. So the book really recounts a very short period of that kind of intensity. I certainly was not at her side to that degree over the 10 years of our friendship.
No, but you were there at the end, and
Yes.
in fact, I mean, stark details about how physically she fell apart after undergoing chemo, and I mean, you don't spare us any detail about what it's like to go through awful cancer treatment. Why were you not put off by all of that?
I suppose I was, because I would go from her hospital bed, and then I would go to a trial where in one case it was a sexual assault trial, and the woman, Kathy, she had been sexually assaulted with a knife, and she was lying on her bed too. And I put the two of them together. I thought, there was Anne, and she's the victim of a physical pathology, cancer. And there is Kathy, and she is the victim of a social pathology, which is crime. And what could I do about it? I mean, I was doing my job, but I really couldn't do anything to help Anne get better, or indeed to help Kathy do anything either. I knew how to do my job. I knew exactly how to give an accused person a fair trial. And I found that I wanted to let more of my own self out in future and in the rest of my life in some way. This didn't happen overnight at all. It was a continual thing and process over the next 3 years.
But that is something I've been curious about with judges, because I mean, the assumption is that you can't live the life that anybody else can live, right? You've got to be so much more proper and strict in what you
Yes.
allow yourself to do. You can't be seen out partying at 1 o'clock
Right.
in the morning,
Correct.
you know, all of that.
Yes.
Did you get to a point where those constraints, it was just enough?
It wasn't so much those constraints. Obviously, judges in Canada are not personalities, and it is crucial to the administration of justice that judges are unbiased and independent. Judges cannot go out and engage in the kinds of activities they likely did before, working for civil rights or animal rights or whatever, because judges never know what kind of case are going to come up before them. So it's important to preserve that independence and integrity.
But every now and then they get swept into politics. And I'm referring now to the former Prime Minister of the country,
Yes.
you know, pretty much attacking the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. And she basically had to hold her tongue, right? I mean, Justice McLaughlin could not attack back.
Well, I think that she preserved the dignity of the institution, and in the end, she won out.
Well, she's still there and he's not, if that's what you mean. But what'd you think when you saw that happen?
I think that the politicization of the judicial process is extremely unhealthy. We have only to look to our southern neighbors to see that. To say that somebody favors one political party or another, or that one is undermining the aims and missions of one political party or government is not healthy.
We could have a long discussion about our court not being as political as their court, but that would take me away from the book, so I want to get back on the book. What did you hope to accomplish when you became a judge, that after having been a judge, you discovered, I really can't get that done, actually?
I think that it was difficult for me, having worked in law reform all of my legal career. I worked to improve conditions for homemakers, wives, family law reform, environmental law reform, huge pension law reform. And when I became a judge, I could not do any of that. I did, however, try to reform judges' pensions.
Well, you could put the bad guys away, right?
And do that, yes.
Did you get satisfaction from putting a bad person away?
I didn't get satisfaction of putting somebody away. I did my job fairly and with dispassion.
What, though, at the end of the day, did you see about the justice system that you thought, this needs changing, and it's not going to change, and that frustrates the hell out of me?
I know that the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not going to change, and that is absolutely right. I think the adversarial nature of the law has to be changed in several regards, yes.
Amplify on that a bit. What do you mean?
For example, cross-examination, we've discussed you're being attacked. And there is a rule against consistent statements not being allowed in evidence. And so in cross-examination, however, a witness will be cross-examined about any inconsistency on any statement given before, so that the credibility of the witness is impaired, obviously by an outright lie, but also by whittling away at what the witness has said. I'll give you an example. In one case in the book, a child is 17 and she's giving evidence. She's the only witness in a sexual assault case. The sexual assault occurred 10 years before she was giving her evidence. And nobody else was called as a witness. This child had told her mother, her aunt, perhaps a social worker, likely police, what occurred over the course of those years. And yet, none of these people were called because it's considered to be self-serving. It's boosting your own evidence. And I think that this rule should be re-examined so that prior consistent statements can go in, so that it counterbalances the cross-examination on inconsistencies.
And if I recall, you had to acquit that defendant in that case, did
Exactly,
you not?
yes.
And you did.
Yes.
Even though you probably felt lousy about it.
I didn't feel lousy about my decision. I felt badly for the child.
You have put it more elegantly than I did. That's sort of what I meant, but you hit it right. Madam Justice, I would love it if you would take your copy of the book and read an excerpt after 13 years on the bench, this one's called, and let's hear a little bit of January.
After 13 years on the bench, I seem to be half living other people's lives, yet not living my own. I was reliving the lives of others. The father who sodomized his stepdaughter on their walks in the local park. The 6-year-old on the stand who plaited and unplaited the ears of her worn, stuffed bunny, unable to look at her molester in the prisoner's box. The wife who had allowed her children to be tortured for years by her husband, and who now carried a hat pin to stab herself as she crossed the street, lest she begin to go into another personality. The husband and wife who broke every major bone in their newborn's body. The horrors were unending, and too many details stayed fresh. I was always on the outside, required to look in, seeing what they did and who they did it to, seeing who they were, all those accused and innocent and guilty and not guilty who lived rent-free in my mind and appeared at will.
Now that's one example of many in the book where you are brutally candid about some of the things that you saw, not only in the court, but there are other chapters in the book as they relate to your friend who is undergoing cancer treatment, where again, you are very candid, deeply personal about sharing some of your feelings about what you were experiencing. That's not a very judge-like thing to do. And I wonder if you had any qualms about being so candid in the book in so many different places.
Yes, I do have qualms, but I believe that women's voices should be heard. And as I've said, a lot of women do not talk intimately about their lives. I remember a famous author, Carolyn Heilbrunn, wrote a book called Writing a Woman's Life, and she commented and remarked how few women are really candid about their lives. And I believe in sharing what happened to me, hoping that it will help other women who have important positions, especially women in male-dominated professions, that it's important to speak your own truth and to speak in your own voice.
I mean, it's a great read on its own, but is that part of the mission here? You're hoping to let I mean, a terrible expression in some respects, but let 1,000 flowers bloom as it relates to female voices.
I believe that that's nicely put, yes. Yes.
Is there another memoir in the offing?
I have actually written another one, but it needs to be rewritten.
And what does this, I guess I want a sneak peek on what Volume 2 is going to be about.
I actually described how it's from when I was a teenager to graduating from law school.
Which is
kind
not
of
covered in this book.
A
prequel, very good, okay. Well, you know, Star Wars did, what are they up to, 7 or 8 movies
dear.
right now? So you got a long way to go to catch up.
I do.
Madam Justice Corbett, it's a great pleasure to meet you here on TVO, and thank you for the book, which I loved, and look forward to reading the second one as well.
Thank you very much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.